Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing the unit tier list series for all the Han units in Total War 3 Kingdoms, with all the red or shock cavalry units. This tier list is the fourth in our series covering all the Han units in the game, color by color. So if you missed out on any of our previous three, covering all the infantry units in the game, then there will be a link in the description below to the playlist of all the tier lists that are on the channel. Now, red units or shock cavalries are some of the most powerful units in the game. But unlike all the other units we have discussed so far in any of our previous tier lists, the power of these red units come from their speed and charge bonus instead of traditional stats like attack rate and damage. Therefore, our evaluation of these units will end up being a little bit different. So let's hop into game and take a look at all 8 of these shock cavalry units before coming back here to properly rank them. Alrighty guys, so we're here in the game looking at one of the most basic shock cavalry units in the game with the peasant raiders, and we're going to start with them as they are the lowest cost, and we're going to work our way up all the way to the more premium unit, ending with the Imperial Lancer Cavalry, and then the return to take a look at the Mounted Lancer Militia, which is available on all unit classes, as we can recruit both of these units on He Jin. And we're utilizing He Jin once again because he's the only general that can recruit these Imperial units. Other than that, we pick Xiahou Yuan simply because he's a pretty generic unique Vanguard character, so his skill tree is not going to make any huge impact on the stats of these units. And we'll talk about some of the impact of Vanguard classes and whether you should recruit your shock cavalry on these generals or not. But to start things off, we have the Peasant Raiders here. Now, Peasant Raiders, despite their cheap cost, are actually pretty strong units in the game. You can see that they have outstanding damage. Now, the damage figure here, with the insanely high armor piercing damage that we see, of 53, is actually skewed with about 40% boost from their base stat. Most cavalry units tend to have lower damage, with the damage profile heavily in favor of armor piercing damage, so I think the base value for them should be around 34, but because both Vanguards and Sentinels have ability that can boost their armor piercing damage, we're seeing huge percentage boost on these units, since those bonuses, I believe from the intensity scale, are own army boost, so not own retinue boost, therefore everyone's getting a boost across the board. But typically these units do not have that high of armor piercing damage, although you can recreate this situation quite easily in the game. What the general will bring in terms of what you can add by recruiting your cavalry on a Vanguard general is a speed multiplier, as well as an increased charge speed, which you can't see here on the unit card. But essentially, when you command one of these units to charge at the enemy, they will gain increased speed as they pick up pace to charge into them. And speaking of charging, that is really the big deal about shock cavalries in Total War 3 Kingdoms, as shock cavalries are very good at disrupting enemy formations and killing massive amount of enemies just from the charge alone. So the only stat that you really need to consider on these units most of the time is how high is their melee charge bonus, because that's a multiplier that will be added to all their damage output, and how much mass the unit have, which is not a figure that we can see on the unit card, but you can kind of imply it from their armor, and then you can see their speed, because speed dictates how much force you make on impact, and that's pretty much all we have to consider. Now, something special about the Peasant Raider is they are very fast, they have decent damage, their drawback is they have low morale, and you need 3 reforms to unlock them, which is actually quite surprising given that they are a peasant unit. They also have a very unique trait of the Raider trait, which means if you place them near enemy structures and they're idle, they will burn those buildings down, which sometimes can be very helpful. You can have one of these units run around a town, burn everything down, and damage to settlement is actually going to make a huge impact on the morale of the enemy force, which is another way you can utilize these troops to demoralize the enemy. But overall, these are just very simple beginning unit. Their weakness is their low morale, which often will hurt them a bunch, and their low armor also means they have low survivability, but you really want to protect your shock cavalry unit. So sometimes low armor is not a bad thing, as low armor often means high speed. Then moving on, we have another unit that's on the lower end. These are called Raider Cavalries. These are available right away. They're very similar to Peasant Raiders. They're just slightly more advanced in terms of their stat. You can see they have the same speed, same weapon, higher charge, higher morale, same exact trait. They also don't require any reform, so in essence, they're just an upgraded version of the Peasant Raiders. They're slightly more expensive to make up for their stat increases here, but aside from that, nothing really different between these two units. Then moving on, we have a unit that everyone should be very familiar with, and these are the mounted Lancer Militias. Now, the first thing you'll notice, the damage profile is very different on these, as the weapon has switched from a spear and glaive to a ji. So ji is slightly lower damage, especially on the armor piercing side, because it's still getting that 40% boost, because that's to all the unit in own army. And you also have 24 base damage. That's not getting boosted. So you can imagine the regular attack damage profile on these are slightly higher base damage and lower armor piercing. But what they lose out in terms of armor piercing damage is the fact that they have 219 charge, which is super high compared to two units that we just looked at, which are closer in the 150s. And this unit here goes above 200. And that's what really set them apart. They also have far greater armor at 20% versus the other two units we just saw at 7%, while maintaining the same speed. So not only are their charge bonus higher, they have greater mass and also the same speed, which means they'll do a lot better in charges. Mounted Lancer Militias are also militia unit, therefore they're available for all classes to recruit, whereas the two Raider variants we just seen, Peasant Band or Peasant Raiders and Raider Cavalry, are both only available to Vanguard Generals. So that makes this unit a standout because they are available to everyone and they do what Shock Cavalries are designed to do very well in terms of high charge bonus and high speed. Then, moving on, we have the upgraded version of the militia in the Lance Cavalry. These will also require 3 reforms to unlock. They have slightly higher morale. They have slightly higher charge bonus. They have a lot slower speed for a 12% increase in armor, which I feel like is a real shame. They also have slightly higher damage, but not by much at all, so that's not really the key here. But they're just a slight improvement over the militia. They're no longer available on all generals, they're only available on Vanguard generals. However, because they're not a militia unit, these units will have access to formations should you have a strategist or a commander commanding the army. And you can see that the two standard cavalry formations are the diamond and the wedge. The diamond, as the name suggests, puts you in a diamond-shaped formation, and it's designed to be kind of an in-between offense and defensive build. It puts you in a tight pack, reduces your speed, increases your mass by 25%, and gives you higher melee evasion. The idea of this formation, from my experience, is to counter enemy cavalry charges, or to charge into enemy cavalries, as the increased mass and melee evasion will help you, and the tight formation from the mass will also help you absorb enemy charges. So that's the key here. Whereas the wedge formation is designed to ram into enemy infantry lines. It doubles your mass, it gives you 50% higher charge speed, while lowering your armor and base speed. So you might lose out on some overall speed, especially if you maintain this formation when you're not charging into things. But as you charge into an enemy unit, you are going to maintain pretty decent speed while doubling your mass. You will lose half of your armor. You gain extra melee charge bonus, 25%. So you can see this formation is designed to maximize the impact damage you have on enemy units when you charge into them. And it's very powerful. If you have a chance to utilize this, because it does take a couple seconds to form up, phase 1, 3 seconds. So you need to do this before you start charging up close. You need some forming distance before you get into the wedge, and then you ram your wedge right into the enemy unit. But if you can utilize this, you can do a lot more damage on your initial charge. And that's the Lance Cavalry. Then we get to some more premium units, starting with the Cataphract. The Cataphract will take 4 reforms. These were introduced first when the 8 Princes were released. They absolutely look amazing. As the name suggests, they are the heavily armored cavalry unit, the Heavy Cavalry. They have 53 armor, which is just outstanding. This is the same tier as most advanced infantry when you see 53 armor, that's pretty much the heavy variant of all units in the game. They lose a lot of speed because of this, so they are down to 73 speed, and this is after being boosted by the bonus on the Vanguard, the mobility skill. In reality, their base figure is somewhere around 58. Now obviously everyone's getting boosted because we have them all on Vanguards. The only difference will be this Imperial unit, which is showing 68, but in reality the Lancer Cavalry, the Imperial Lancer Cavalry, actually have a higher base speed than Cataphracts, about 4 points higher. But because you don't get a boost of speed here on Hejin versus on Vanguard General or on Commander General or someone with mobility skill, therefore it looks lower, but in reality the Cataphracts are the slowest cavalry unit in the game. They have the same weapon as both of the Raider units. You can see the 53 armor piercing on them, same attack rate, not that high morale, and not that high charge bonus. It's matching about the charge bonus of the Lance Cavalry that we just seen, 245 here, 241 here, so it's even slightly lower, but they do benefit from higher mass, and their selling point is actually the armor. Not only the actual stat, but also the look. I'm sure many people recruit them just to have Cataphracts in the army. They simply look amazing. And if you think they look amazing, let's skip over this one. Let's go for the more expensive one, the Heavy Cataphract. So they take one more reform on the tree, and then you can recruit these instead. They obviously have higher stats across the board. They'll be more expensive, but in my opinion, they're actually worth the money. Many times the heavy variants are not as good as the regular variants in the game, but the cavalry units here, especially the Heavy Cataphract, is a very special case where that is not true, because you get paid and you're getting value back from the extra money on stats that actually matter. You get extra morale, you get extra charge, 294 is very high, same weapon, but weapon here doesn't matter, so we're not wasting any money on any improved weapons here. You're not going to use your damage to kill units, you're going to run them over. You get an increase in armor, therefore increase in mass, and you don't lose any speed. This is the case where you tanked up, but as a cavalry you didn't lose any speed versus the regular Cataphract, which makes Heavy Cataphract just straight up better than Cataphracts, and in my opinion justify their higher cost. And aside from this unit, we have another unit here that we skipped over. These are the Jade Dragons. These are the dragon variants of the red unit. They take a ton of reforms to unlock, 9 reforms, but the reform path is not that bad, to be honest. 9 is obviously not a super high number either. It's not like Yellow Dragon territory where you need like 15, 16 reforms. The same amount you need for Onyx Dragon. Now of course the reforms you get is not as economically friendly, but it's very military focused. So if you're going for a military campaign, you're not playing Cao Cao, who has basically Tiger and Leopard Cavalry, which is their unique unit. That's kind of a variant of Jade Dragons. These are excellent units to go for. You can see that they have a shield. That is the key difference here. They are the only shock cavalry unit with a shield, and that shield is giving them 60% range block chance, which is the weakness of all shock cavalry units. Shock cavalries will take more damage from enemy range. Now, it's not explicitly said that they will take more damage, it's just that all range units will deal extra damage to cavalry, which is why melee cavalry's got the 50% damage reduction to balance that out. So that's just something we can clear up. So they will take a lot of damage from enemy range, but they make up for it by having 60% range block chance, and the shield gives them 27% extra armor. So that means together, these add 80% armor when facing the enemy from the front. So if the enemy arrows are coming at you, 80% armor is an astounding amount of armor. The enemy range damage, unless you're facing crossbows, which have armor piercing damage, if you're facing Onyx Dragons, they're not going to hurt a lot. That 48 base damage on the Onyx Dragons is barely going to scratch you for about 9-10 damage. That's nothing compared to how individually tanky these units are, as they have a high health point spread across only 30 units. So that's where they're strong. They don't have as high charge bonus as the Heavy Cataphract we've seen, but this is on par with the standard Cataphract, even though you're much tankier. You also don't have as strong as weapon damage because you're holding a one-handed spear, which has less damage, which makes sense. But you also don't lose out on speed. These units, 78 versus 73 on both of the cataphracts, have higher speed and maintain the same mass as the cataphract unit because of the armor figure. You can tell the 53 base armor pretty much tells what their mass is. And in comparison, they have the same base speed as the Imperial Lancer Cavalry, so we can use them as a proxy to what the speed of that unit should be if it was given to a Vanguard General, so 78. That's decently high. These guys are going to be a great kind of mix-use unit because they have some characteristic of a melee cavalry while maintaining most of the strength of Vanguard units, which makes them very powerful. Then we're done with all the units that we can see in custom battle on Vanguards, and we'll move on to these Imperial unit, which can only be showcased on Hejin here. Now, we already mentioned the speed will be higher. They will also have higher damage because they have the same exact weapon as the Raider variant, where the base damage is around 34, and that will get boosted to around 53. Right, so they should have 53 armor piercing damage. They have extremely high melee charge bonus. 398. And if you just hover over here, you can see that they are given Mighty Knockback, which is usually a trait that's only given to generals. So if you play the game and seen the general unit rush into the enemy and knock a shockwave of units down, that's what this unit have. So not only can you knock down more units, the knockdown units will take more damage, and you can charge through an infantry unit much easier with these units, on top of your insane melee charge bonus. Imagine this unit on a general where you have Sun Ce as your faction heir or leader. That's double charge bonus, so they have close to 800 melee charge bonus. You run this guy into an enemy general, that general will evaporate into thin air. And on top of that, because they are Imperial unit, they get the Imperial Solidarity buff if you have 2 of the Imperial units near them, which makes them have even higher armor piercing damage, extra morale, extra melee evasion. The first 2 doesn't matter as much, but the extra armor piercing will also help. They are going to be not general killers, they're going to evaporate enemy generals. That's how good these guys are, because generals have high armor, you have high armor piercing damage, you have high charge bonus, which goes through evasions and all sorts of stats. They can't stop charge damage, and you're just going to erase enemy generals. You have a decent amount of speed, you're faster than cataphracts, we already mentioned that. And you also have great armor and great evasion. So they are definitely top of the line. They don't have access to Wedge though, which is actually quite strange. But they not Wedge, they don't have access to Diamond, that's what I meant. But they do have access to Wedge, so they're still very good there. And then just to follow up, we are going to just take a quick look at Mounted Lancer Militias on a non-Vanguard General. The place we're going to lose out on is clearly damage and also on speed. There is an extra own retinue buff from Vanguard Generals that will boost the attack of the armor piercing damage. That is their unique skill at the bottom of the skill tree. And obviously mobility we already mentioned. So that kind of sums up all the stats of these units. It's quite simple to evaluate them just because you're focused in only on a few stats, and they're very similar across the board. You see only about 2 different types of weapons they hold, and then you can just take a quick look at the armor stat, which isn't that important, and mainly you're just looking for speed, charge damage, and you also need to be mindful of morale a little bit. That's often what's holding back some of these units, because technically they can all be good general killers, but if the general you're charging into has some sort of splash damage or some sort of morale hit, and they hit you back, your unit will rout, and that makes them quite useless against generals. Other than that, all these units with high armor piercing damage, high charge are excellent units to kill generals, given their high speed for chase down as well. So that's going to wrap it up for us here, as we're going to hop back into the tier lists and rank these guys. So see you guys there. Alrighty, so armed with all that analysis, we can finally begin our final rankings, but before we start, there's still the few disclaimers. First, these rankings will obviously be my opinion, based on my experience with single-player romance campaigns on Legendary difficulty. And second, all the stats and figures that we have seen from our analysis so far are on large unit sizes on patch 1.6.1, so please adjust accordingly if you happen to be playing on a different unit size or a later patch. And with that out of the way, let's start ranking these. And we'll start things off with what I think is the S tier unit. Which unit is the best unit in the game here? The best unit in the game here, in my opinion, for the Shock Cavalries, is actually going to be the simple Lancer Militia unit. And the rationale is quite simple. This unit has everything you want from a cavalry unit. They have over 200 charge bonus. They have decent morale. It's over 30. They are the fastest unit you can get at over 119 speed if you have all the proper buffs, which makes up for the fact that they don't have the highest armor. But unlike the two Peasant Band or Raider Cavalry, they have decent armor. They're not the 7% you see often on many militia unit. It's actually 20%, which is pretty decent. And combined with the fact that they're cheap, they're available from the beginning of the game, they're available for all generals to hire, because oftentimes you might not necessarily want vanguards to be recruiting these units. Sometimes having a commander taking control of shock cavalries is equally good. You pretty much have all the boosts that Vanguard can provide, minus a minor armor piercing damage boost, which is not important, while giving them other passive active abilities, including ones that can give them more morale, gives them more mobility, and ignore force penalties. There's a lot of good stuff. And you're also allowed to mix and match your melee and shock cavalry, as they can be pretty much treated together in the game. So oftentimes having a commander taking control of some Vanguard generals, or Vanguard units in this case, is definitely a great idea. So I'm going to put the Militia Cavalry Lancer on the top. Then we're going to go with some more elite unit, as after all, 200 charge bonus is good, but not great. We have some great unit for that. And the next two for the A tier, we're going to use two that has different purposes, but they're both wonderful. One will be the Jade Dragon, and then the second will be the Imperial Lancer Cavalry. Now these two units will be unlocked on the same reform. I'm going to put the Jade Dragon slightly ahead of the Lancer, not because of how much it outperforms on the battlefield. It doesn't actually has that much killing power when you compare it to the Imperial Lancer Cavalry. But you don't need to be an Emperor to use Jade Dragons. So by the time you rush those 9 reforms, which can be as soon as turn 43, you have access to this wonderful unit, and you can utilize it right away. But if you rush it, and you're not Emperor yet, which I highly doubt you'll be Emperor on turn 43, it's rather hard to get enough prestige points. And in the case if you're playing as a Governor faction where you don't spawn an Emperor seat, then you have to wait till you capture your first one. So in all those scenarios, you don't have access to Imperial Lancer Cavalry right away, therefore you can't utilize them as early, and also the replenishment debuff on them is also quite annoying. So I'm going to give the Jade Dragon a slight leg up in this comparison. Even though they're clearly not as high damage, they do have a shield, which makes them a little bit multi-purpose for those instances when you're not running a commander, when you can't run melee cavalries with the nobility skill from commanders in the unit, which gives them the 85% range block chance. In that case, Jade Dragons are going to be your go-to with 60% on perhaps like a Vanguard general, which is the usual typical general you would have your shock cavalries on. And then compare them with the Imperial Lancer Cavalry, which is just straight up stud unit in the game. Such high damage, such high melee charge bonus. You get over 398, so pretty much 400 charge bonus right there. Doubles the Lancer Militia we just seen, and I think it's about 100 points clear of even the Jade Dragon unit. So just outstanding. And then into the B tier, we're going to put the Heavy Cataphract, which is one of those rare instances where the heavy unit outperforms the standard unit, and it makes sense here. You get extra armor, but you don't lose any speed, so you're heavier, tankier, more morale, higher charge damage version of your lesser unit, and you're paying for all those stats that's actually going to matter on the battlefield. So they're going to be the B tier. They're not as good as the A tier. They're a bit slower. They don't have a shield like the Jade Dragon, and they're definitely 100 points or even more in terms of less melee charge bonus compared to the Imperial Lancer Cavalry. So they're going to lose out there as well. So they're going to be the only B tier, and then we're going to move their lesser version, the Standard Cataphract, into C, and then also the Lancer Cavalry. These are the slightly upgraded version of the militia unit. They have slightly higher charge bonus compared to them. They have more morale. They're better, clearly, but they're not available on all generals. You have to run these last 3 units here on a Vanguard, and that's also something that's going to hold them back, as we mentioned running these units on Commander sometime is a great idea. And then finally, we have two of the most basic unit here. They are cheap, but in my opinion, they're not worth your money to recruit. You can easily use the militia units much better, and they're going to be your peasant band and your raider cavalry. And the reason why they're at the low end is, well, for the peasant band, you need 3 reforms to unlock them, which is ridiculous in my opinion. But comparing the two, they have only roughly 150 melee charge bonus, which is not that high. It's about 50 points less than the militia. You can only run them in vanguards. Their charge bonus is only about 30-40 points higher than purple infantry, which we have seen in our last tier list. They have very low morale, which means any sort of night battle, any sort of arrows hitting them are going to wipe them out. They only have 7% armor, and they maintain the same speed as the militia unit. So just a direct comparison, the militia units are just leaps and bounds better than them. Therefore, they have really no purpose in your army, because at least I can say the Lance Cavalry is an upgraded version of the militia while maintaining about the same speed. So they are just straight up worse, therefore they get the D tier. And that's going to wrap up our tier list here on the red units or the shock cavalry. And we're going to move on to the yellow units, which there are only 4 of. And we're going to do that tomorrow. And we're going to wrap up this series. And then next week, we're going to move into bandits and Nunman units and the base game yellow turban units. And in the future, as many of you have requested, we'll do some general tier lists as well. So hopefully you guys enjoy this one, and we'll see you next time. Bye!